this session with an awesome panel. The title of the session is Exploring the Use of Data for Social Impact Measurement and Reporting. So why is this topic so important? And why do we need to have this discussion today at the SIPA Leap 2020 conference? So let me give you a bit of context as to why this is so important. So I think we all know that we are less than 10 years away from the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. The pandemic that we've recently experiencing and still going through has certainly illuminated various challenges such as inequality, empowering marginalized groupings, supporting local small and growing businesses. And I think there's a lot of urgency now around how these goals and targets need to be met. I think we're also seeing that there's a considerable amount of impact investing that is also happening across the continent. And impact investing in itself is quite a new field. And it's really becoming prominent to ensure that there are measurable social and environmental impact that needs to be achieved. And I think this is now causing several funders, capacity builders, intermediaries, and donors to rethink the way in which the monitoring and evaluation of impact needs to happen. I think we also know that to be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, certain critical frameworks need to be activated, and stakeholders need to start becoming accountable for these targets to ensure delivery. The practice of evaluation, I think we know, which includes data collection, analysis, and reporting, helps to achieve this and make this possible. I think another important aspect is around advocating for policy change. And this is really dependent on the right and inclusive data sets being available, coupled with impactful engagement across all levels, whether this be national or international. So for the duration of our discussion today, we'll be unpacking this particular topic through three angles or three focus areas, which the panel today is going to input to and give their perspectives on. The first aspect that we're going to unpack is around the lack of data across various social issues that has certainly been identified as a key factor inhibiting policy advancement in Africa. So what are some of the challenges that have caused this to linger, whether they be systemic or cultural factors? So we'll be speaking about that. The second aspect we'll be speaking about is, as a result of the pandemic, what elements of evaluation have become more difficult, and what are some of the ways that have been employed to try and alleviate some of these challenges around evaluation. The third element that we want to discuss is, what are some of the trends that we're seeing that are helping funders and implementers to make better informed decisions and certainly engage other stakeholders better. So the panel will be getting into the meat of these elements as we go on. I think for now, what I would like to do is to hand over to the panel, who are going to tell you who they are. So they're going to introduce themselves, where they come from, give you an indication of what they do, and then to share their perspectives on these three aspects that we are going to be focusing on. So without further ado, let me hand over to Kat. So Kat, over to you. And please do remember to put your video on and activate your audio as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Desigan. So my name is Kat Athanasiadis, and I am an evaluation professional in Washington, D.C. in the U.S. And so I work with a small nonprofit organization that is somewhere between an evaluation consulting firm and a think tank. And we work primarily with foundations and philanthropy. So mostly we're working with foundations who are based in the U.S., and some of them are funding only in the US, and many of them are also funding internationally too. Many of them are funding in many different countries in Africa. And so the ways that I engage with these foundations and with evaluation is that sometimes I work directly with organizations whose programs are being evaluated, but more often I work at the strategy level in foundations to understand how their strategies are delivering on specific goals that they've set for those strategies and for what they're trying to achieve with their funds. And so what that means then is that I would look at the collective or the combined effects of the grants that they make to a number of their grantees. So that's on the evaluation side of things. And then I think part of the reason that I'm on this panel is because we also host a network of foundations called the Evaluation Roundtable. A large part of our work is trying to push foundations on the ways that they think about evaluation and on the ways that they think about what's important to understand when they're thinking about how to make change happen. And so when we are trying to push these foundations on their evaluation practice, sometimes that looks like coaching foundations in thinking about what are, say, different indicators or metrics that that would be important for them to collect, or how they need to think about what those indicators mean for their progress. And sometimes it looks like convening folks to think about what it means as a whole, to be forming strategy with or without the voices of different stakeholders, or with or without different kinds of data or different kinds of reflection that they hopefully would engage in order to make better sense of their work. So those are a couple of the things that we do. And so in part because we have this network that we host, we also have a broad view of what foundations are doing across the philanthropic sector in the US. And so that's both around evaluation and learning, and then also in their response to COVID. So I'm going to pause there and pass it over to Olusegun.
Great, thank you so much, Kat. Thanks for the introduction. So Olusegun, over to you. Would you mind introducing yourself, telling our audience where you come from, and what your focus is in this particular space? Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Olusegun Onimide. I'm the director for budgets, and I'm really happy to be here. Some little bit technical glitches. I work in budgets, a civic organization based in Nigeria. We also have offices in Ghana, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. The work we do is to make sure that public data is simple and accessible. Everybody, irrespective of your literacy class, can understand how public finances work. We pay attention a lot with data to design, and also trying to build that with advocacy. And I know that for someone that works with data, we are constantly thinking about impact, about how do we evaluate impact, how do we ensure that impact will be not just to the donors, who definitely will be interested in that, but also to the society, that we are even true and faithful to the mission and to the goals that we have set for ourselves. And we have a space called Civic Hive. It's an innovation space in Lagos, where one of the work we do is also to research social impact organizations and be able to also understand the impact that they are making within the environment. One of the few things that I've learned in doing all that work is to ensure that we're counting the right things, and we also don't confuse volume with depth. So it's been an interesting work that we've done so far, and I'm really, really glad to be here. Thank you.
Okay, great, excellent. Thanks to both you and Kat for those introductions. I think let's get into the meaty part of our discussion today. So I really want to unpack the first element where we speak about the challenges around data, and a lack of data being one of the challenges around policy advancement within Africa. But I guess it may be a global discussion as well, Kat. To be able to make sure that we have this element of data to be able to make informed decisions, and I think maybe let's just explore, and we'll start with Olusegun, just to get his perspective around some of these data challenges and what has led to that. And I think Olusegun, if you could also just think about what could be some of the solutions to alleviating some of these challenges?
Okay. I mean, the first challenge when it comes to getting data is just because we're a society, I mean, especially in the African context, we hardly count. Just because ugly truths that data reveals that everyone's trying to dodge. No one wants to confront those truths head on. I mean, look at Nigeria's population, the issues of digital ID in Nigeria, the ability to have a robust single user database. All of those information are critical and important to the growth or the development of Nigeria, but we have really not paid attention into it. So what you would have is that the data producers who are the floor of all of this, like the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics or even other different agencies in government, pay attention to putting data in a structured manner, that those who, the intermediaries or those who use the data are able to build things on top of that. And we have not been able to do that effectively. So, and I think it's just because, number one, we don't like the truths that emanate from data. Number two, is also because we always just have a feeling. You know, there's always this thing to run development by feeling, or to run processes by feeling, or to assume, or to run population or assumptions in the past. And that's even a major problem where we have not been able to do things right, even have effective revenues, or even maximizing taxation and things like that. And I think it's also not allowed also have an explosion of social entrepreneurship, because you just imagine that you have robust data systems on healthcare, on education, on governance, on procurement. I mean, for example, budget is an example that just a budget data being public shows that you can build something on top of that. You can build something on top of that that hires close to 70 people and that field officers. You can build something on top of that that can generate value and you know, run a budget into millions of USD in a year. And able to build around, you leave the rest, their creative energies of young people, to build something effective on that. I think it's very important that we have to start paying attention. And if you talk about the solutions, it's all about intentionality. I mean, being intentional, understanding that we cannot drive development without robust understanding of people, of spaces, of critical indicators. And that means we need to be intentional about it and ensure that the policymakers, the public policymakers, are invested in these systems. I mean, I'm always ashamed when you look at the budget of Nigeria's National Bureau of Statistics. It's grossly underfunded. You know, and it's grossly underfunded because they don't see strength in the numbers. They don't see value in the numbers as much as possible. And it's very important that we are able to critically push public policymakers to invest in data systems, and two, also to activate networks. We also have to make sure that those who show what is possible with data, we're giving them enough support and encouragement. So, for example, what we're doing with budgets, what steers data is trying to do, what public procurement data does with procurement data in Nigeria. We also need to make sure that data users and intermediaries are empowered and strengthened to show that the incredible results that you can get from data. So I think that I'll put it that way.
Great, thanks so much. I think a lot of what you said is so true around the use of data and the availability of data. Kat, would you like to weigh in on this as well? Just share your perspective with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that there's a couple of thoughts came to mind about the importance of data and the different kinds of data that we often collect to make decisions about our programs. And so one of the things is that when you are collecting data and when you've decided on a set of measures, those are the things that then become important to the program, right? And so it's really important to think very carefully about the kinds of data that you're collecting and whether those really are the important things to invest time and energy in collecting, because if they aren't, then they still maintain this importance to your program, and it's a real resource drain if you're collecting the wrong things, and then you may be making decisions based on indicators or metrics that aren't the ones that are the most important. So I think that there's that challenge for sure. Another challenge I think is that at least in the philanthropic sector with foundations often exhaust their evaluative and their reporting energy on quantitative indicators, and grantees also count what's countable when they're trying to describe change. And so one of the ways that we think it's important to shift this practice and gain better, deeper insights into ways to transform your work so that it is more effective is to, for example, refocus your data and your conversation on understanding a couple of critical questions deeply and from many different perspectives, rather than measuring everything that's countable, because there are so many things that are not actually countable. I know that in a conversation we had the other day, and I think Aleutian agrees that it's a lot about the stories that people tell about what their experiences are and what the changes are like and how they are happening in their lives, and not necessarily just their age and these things that are countable, how much water they have in their houses, for example. So another thing that we promote is thinking about systematic methods, or using systematic methods, or using more robust evaluation where there's uncertainty, or where something really isn't clear, where there's something that's important and complex to try to figure out. And instead of using data as a confirmation tool for the things that we already know are working. We know that there's a limited amount of energy and resources that grantees, nonprofits, non-governmental organizations can put towards evaluation. And so it's really important to try to direct that funding to the things that are most important to understand, again, so that you can make decisions about your strategy that will help you to be more effective in your work. And so it's as a part of that, we think it's important to resituate the data as a starting point for a conversation rather than an ending point. So I think those are some thoughts that I have on that question.
Okay, excellent. I think again, Kat, so much of what you said just resonates. And I think one of the things that I wanted to get your input on was, as you said, you need to have a proactive approach when it comes to data. And Oluseun, I know you, in a prior chat, you made a great point around storytelling, and I think it's something that I want to unpack in the next question. But just in terms of the availability of resources to capacitate evaluators, the knowledge around evaluation, and the ability to come up with meaningful reporting that is actually going to inform decision making, I think is an element that we also need to be mindful of. How much of effort and resources and funding allocation goes towards improving the skills, the capacity, the knowledge of the evaluators, I think is something that is equally important. So I quickly wanted to get your view on that, Oluseun, and then Kat.
So with you, I'm a firm believer, especially for social entrepreneurs, we should be mindful of what is called the tyranny of quantification. Where we believe that every single thing, everything we all have numbers. Because in a way, you have to understand that the work that we do within the social interest space is just about, there's a complex context around it. So you can't just say, oh, because we are going to stay just only on the data. And that's why I made that point where we had a precession around not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that counts, can be counted. I mean, not everything can be counted counts, or not everything that counts can be counted. And I mean, it's the way for us to be so that we don't get fixated about just this is the same level of data. And the second thing I always tell people also when we talk about data with social entrepreneurial work and when we are trying to evaluate, it's also stand and depth are separate elements. So just because someone says I've reached 1 million people and you have reached 10,000 people does not mean that you are doing less because you've reached 10,000 people. Because I might call 1 million people into a concert and we have a conversation and we all drink and dance away, and that's just where it ends. Or I have a much more intense 10,000 people where I've been able to work with and groom it. So it's also very important that we don't get lost in that we have to all deal with the big numbers. we also have to be intentional about gradually, showing that depth is very, very much of importance. Even volume is important, but depth also is equally important. And I think if we put it in those three spaces, as social entrepreneurs, we'll keep thinking to impact the environment more. And when we can't even find the data to validate all of that point, the place where we can also find refuge and comfort is in storytelling. We to be able to show that we do a lot of investment in storytelling. I see a whole lot of NGOs in the North, I mean, in the US, and invest within the African space. I don't think we do enough of that. We put a lot of our energy to let's get the work going, let's get the work done, let's write the 40-page voluminous reports and excite the donor. But the storytelling for external stakeholders to be able to excite, to be able to demonstrate the impact of what we have done, we don't do it. We are not intentionally a lot in investing in that, and that becomes really, really a problem. In terms of being able to challenge, the resources that we are committed to the work. So I feel that we also have to understand that when it comes to data for social entrepreneurs, we can be excited about it. We can count what's important. We can measure what is really, really critical for our success, but we also have to be intentional about storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Kat, do you want to share a quick perspective on that before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, it's so this perspective is related. I think it's sort of a tangential response to your question. But so one challenges that I see in foundations is this dedication to using like preset or fixed indicators as the main mechanism or as the only mechanism for accountability in terms of, is their strategy working? Is this funding working? Is the grantee working and doing the work successfully? And I think foundation staff are accountable for responding to the insights and to the feedback and to the data that they receive from their partners that helps them and their partners navigate complexity and move closer to their goals and their values. And something that doesn't happen very often in the sector, but I think is really important and is also related to the SDGs, is that outcomes evolve as different actors are debating and negotiating what matters, what's possible, what is the goal of a strategy, what is the goal of the work of an NGO. And so as those outcomes evolve, the things that you're measuring may need to change, because if the goal of your work has shifted from increasing access to jobs to something like increasing the security of a community, because that's the thing that's needed now, then the measures that you were trying to measure around job security or around access to jobs are going to be different than the things that tell you if you're successful in increasing the security of a community. And so really paying attention to the matching up of the ways that the data that you're collecting, again, informs these different goals or different outcomes that you're trying to achieve is really critical in negotiating an evolving strategy, which is the nature of how work happens. Otherwise, you're again measuring the wrong thing, and it's going to perhaps lead you. We've seen it lead folks to make really bad decisions tied to an old strategy that actually is counterproductive to a new goal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just in line with that, if we tackle the next element, around how, as a result of this pandemic, have elements of evaluation, become more difficult, and I guess what are some of the ways that that have been employed to surmount these challenges. I know as Entrepreneurship to the Point, we concluded a knowledge brief in partnership with Andy West Africa and ACT Trust recently to look at the IMM landscape in Nigeria and in Ghana. And one of the things that we found was that to take IMM forward in West Africa, that, the ecosystem players will really have to take some decisive steps in dealing with the issues of funding constraints, data collection challenges, and gaps in the IMM capabilities and capacity. And I guess given the whole scenario around the pandemic now, what are some of the elements that have changed or become more difficult in the evaluation process? And maybe let's start off with you, Kat, to get your perspective on that.
Sure. And this is, I think, a really good example of the kind of place where the goal is now changing rapidly. And so a lot of the kinds of evaluative data that was collected before is no longer the stuff that's important, because a lot of foundation programs, their goal, at least in the US, their goals have shifted from like increasing access to education, decreasing violence in certain communities here, to just like getting people to have enough food in really insecure communities. And now I'm speaking from like what I know about the US context. So yeah, increasing food security in communities and other kinds of COVID response. And so there's a reckoning that's happening right now around what are the kinds of information that foundations have been asking for and are counting in order to inform those now changing goals. And so we're seeing, I think, I don't remember which panelist said it in plenary, that don't waste a crisis, or with the crisis comes an opportunity. So this is a real opportunity for foundations and for nonprofits and NGOs to experiment with testing new models of how you collect data and information, and providing that information back up to your funders, or using it to make your decisions about what works, because the old model is kind of being thrown out the window. And the only other thing I'll say about this before I pass it off is that a lot of the funders in the US, at least, are recognizing that it's becoming harder to collect data on the programs they're funding, because people aren't able to travel in many cases, because people aren't able to get together necessarily, say, to have a focus group. And if, like, for example, you're having a focus group in a rural area that has limited access to other forms of connections, like to technology, to be able to do this online, you're not going to be able to collect that information. And so a lot of foundations, there was already a trend, at least in the US, towards moving towards this more like trust-based responsive model of doing your funding and trusting your partners to make good decisions with that funding. And I think it's moving in that direction even more rapidly because of COVID, because there's a recognition that it's increasingly hard to collect information on the things that were considered important before.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Oluseun, do you have a quick perspective to share before we get into the questions? I see there's 2 questions that have come up. So unfortunately, we have 5 minutes left. So let's see if we can tackle these quickly. Are you with us, Oluseun?
On mute. My own view, clearly, is that we need to, the COVID-19, it throws up some form of understanding to us around citizen database. I saw how Nigeria struggled to provide support, or to be able to understand how best do you even provide support for people in distress. And just because we don't have a robust citizen database, and since you don't have that, you don't have maybe a verifiable addressing system on top of that, you don't have even taxation data in an effective way, and you don't have enough data around even issues of the health standards even within the environment. So it's very important that we pay attention to citizen ID or digital ID, and make sure that that is in a safe and in a secure environment, and privacy rights and things like that are much more secure. I think it's something that we have to pay attention to. That. Also in the evaluation as an organization, we need to inclusion. There's a tendency that because we run non-profit work and we sit in glassy environments within urban cities and in gated estates, there's a time for us to lose the contextual element of the entire society or the communities that we serve. So I think it's also a time to really understand proximity and understand attention about being close to the problems that we are trying to change. It's something I think even myself, I'm always much more deliberate about it. Proximity, because now you begin to see that the society is really, really challenged more than you even can imagine, and it's also time for social entrepreneurship to even rise up.
Yeah, no, absolutely, guys. I think we are running out of time very quickly. The third element of our discussion was really around the emerging trends. And I think you already spoke to some of that in terms of, funders, intermediaries starting to have more of an outcome focused in what they're doing and to be quite deliberate about their impact. And I think this is where, for me, your theory of change holds a lot of water in terms of determining what that future strategy is. And I think, Kat, as you alluded to, given the pandemic, a lot of organizations may have had a theory of change or a strategy, but along the way now, they've had to be agile enough to be able to change, what some of the key outputs or outcomes of interventions were to look like, just given the current context that we are operating in. And certainly, I think there's been a lot of focus now around the factors of vulnerability, focusing on women, on disadvantaged groups, education. These aspects just become more and more important now. So I think to conclude the session, guys, there is one question that I would like to take from the audience. And Olusegun, it's directed to you. So the question is, how do you understand people first when you are at the idea stage of your startup with a lean budget at your disposal?
I mean, we all start with lean budgets. So, what and it could be challenging to raise funding. Running a social impact organization or a social entrepreneur, to be a social entrepreneur. What I advise is, start small. And learn fast. I mean, it's very, very important that you don't, because we all come across with ideas about how big we want to make them be, how big our dreams are, and that's always the stumbling block. In fact, that sometimes is the death of the idea itself. I mean, we must be able to be patient. I mean, I always think that we must carry two thoughts in our head at the same time. We must be patient. We must also be impatient. Patient because we understand that we are in for a very long haul. Impatient that we also have to get going as soon as possible. So in some sort of way, start small. For budget, even for 2 years, we were just moving in very slow space. Maybe total budget was less than $20,000 for the first 2 years of budget. But gradually, when we saw that the validation was there, the idea was there, the opportunity was there, then that's when you now begin to find new allies and you want to accelerate. So I think that patience of starting small and being confident that you are in for the long haul, that's always a major problem. Yeah. So start small with people and learn. Yeah.
Excellent. Guys, we've run out of time. I would really want to express my thanks to both Kath and Olusegun for the time taken today and to have this really great conversation. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough time. I would also love to thank the organizers of LEAP SEPA 2020 for inviting us to this discussion, and certainly the entrepreneurs that are coming out of this program. I think, whatever solutions they are developing, to have that outcome-based focus and really to make sure that the impact of what they are able to achieve is really in line with where the SDGs are. And most importantly, we need to be able to measure it to be able to implement effectively. So thank you very much, everyone. If I could please direct all the participants back to the main stage to conclude the proceedings for today. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day.
Have a good one. Thanks. Yeah, bye.
Thank you.
Go back to the main stage. Yeah.